The London trip was supposed to be the reset. A clean slate. A power move that would silence the whispers and put smiles back on camera. But just hours before Wheels Up, everything went left, and fans are shocked at how fast it unraveled. Sources say Kirk Frost and Jasmine Washington were already en route when the call came in. One call, 2 words, flight cancelled. And just like that, a glamorous London escape turned into a full-blown meltdown that nobody saw coming, especially Rasheeda Frost, who allegedly had no idea management was even involved. What really happened behind the scenes? Who pulled the plug, and why now? Insiders whisper that emotions ran high as accusations flew and loyalties were tested in real time. Cameras weren't rolling, but voices were raised. Text messages were screenshot, and by the time the truth started leaking, the damage was already done. Fans are asking the same question on repeat. Was this about control, or was it about secrets that were never meant to leave the group chat? As the story spilled out, reactions poured in from friends, family, and the fanbase. Some say this was inevitable. Others swear someone crossed a line. One thing's certain, the family was left divided, trust was shaken, and London became the symbol of a trip that never happened, but a drama that absolutely did. Stay right here, because once you hear what was said in that final phone call, and who allegedly greenlit the cancellation, you'll understand why nothing has been the same since. The airport lights were still buzzing when Kirk's phone started vibrating like it had a mind of its own, that sharp relentless buzz cutting through the quiet confidence he'd been wearing all morning. London was supposed to be easy. London was supposed to be clean. No cameras, no blogs, no messy conversations that never seemed to stay private. Jasmine sat a few seats away scrolling through her phone, already posting vague captions about new chapters and international energy, smiling to herself like she could already taste the freedom. Neither of them noticed the tension creeping in until Kirk looked down at his screen and his face dropped so fast it was like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. He stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away, his voice low but sharp as he answered. "Yeah, I'm here. What you mean cancelled? No, you don't understand, we already cleared this." There was a pause, the kind that makes your stomach knot up because you know something bad is coming next. Jasmine looked up then, watching his body language change, the confidence draining out of him as he rubbed his forehead like he was trying to erase the conversation entirely. "Who made that call?" Kirk snapped, and then quieter, "Management." "Since when does management decide this without looping everybody in?" Jasmine walked over, her heels clicking against the floor, her tone already defensive. "What's going on?" Kirk covered the phone, whispering back that the flight was cancelled, that it came from higher up, and that nothing was moving forward today. Her smile vanished instantly. "Cancelled how?" she asked, eyes darting around like someone might be listening. "Cancelled like delayed or cancelled like shut down?" Kirk didn't answer her right away, which was answer enough. This wasn't a delay. This was a wall. Back on the phone, Kirk's voice cracked with frustration. "No, Rashida doesn't even know. That's the problem. You went over everybody's head." Another pause. Fine. We'll talk later." He hung up and for a second just stood there staring at the black screen like it might change its mind. Jasmine crossed her arms, her voice rising despite herself. "So what, we just turn around? After everything? After we told people? After you promised me this was locked in?" Kirk exhaled hard. "I didn't promise you this wouldn't get messy. I promised I'd handle it." Jasmine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Handle it? This is how you handle it? I uprooted my whole schedule for this. People already talking. Now what am I supposed to say?" Kirk snapped back that maybe she should say less online, that the posting didn't help, that eyes were already watching them too closely. That's when Jasmine's tone shifted from annoyed to wounded. "Don't put this on me. You told me it was safe. You told me this trip was approved." What neither of them realized yet was that back home, Rashida was completely in the dark, walking into a studio session with no clue that her name was already being dragged into a decision she didn't make. Her phone was blowing up, messages stacked on top of each other, but she was focused, headphones on, unaware that management had allegedly made a move that would set off a chain reaction nobody could control. When she finally checked her phone and saw missed calls from Kirk back to back, her heart dropped. She stepped outside, calling him immediately, her voice calm but tight. "Why are you calling me from the airport?" Kirk hesitated. That hesitation said more than anything else. Rashida's voice sharpened. "Kirk, why are you at the airport?" When he explained, or tried to, the words came out tangled, defensive, rushed. "Management cancelled the London flight. Said it wasn't the right time. Said it could cause problems." Rashida went silent, and that silence was louder than yelling. "Management cancelled what?" she finally asked. "Without me. Without even asking me." By the time Jasmine overheard Rashida's voice through the phone, she rolled her eyes, whispering under her breath that this was exactly why she didn't trust group decisions. Kirk shot her a warning look, but the damage was already done. Rashida heard the shift, the tension, the unspoken presence on the other end. "Is she with you right now?" Rashida asked, her voice suddenly cold. Kirk didn't answer fast enough. Jasmine leaned in and said, "Yeah, I'm right here. Since we're all involved now." That's when everything cracked. Rashida's composure slipped, emotions running high as she demanded to know why plans were being made that affected her marriage, her image, her business without her consent. Jasmine fired back that she was tired of being treated like a secret, like collateral damage in someone else's storyline. Kirk tried to mediate, his voice overlapping both of theirs, but it was useless. The conversation spiraled into accusations, old wounds reopening, trust being questioned on every level. People nearby started to stare as voices rose, the private turning public in real time. Kirk finally snapped that this was exactly why management stepped in, that this chaos was the reason London got shut down. Jasmine scoffed, saying London got shut down because someone was scared of the truth traveling too far. Rashida hung up abruptly, the call ending without resolution, without closure, leaving Kirk staring at his phone again, realizing this was no longer about a trip. It was about control, about narrative, about lines crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. As Jasmine grabbed her bag and stormed toward the exit, she muttered that this wasn't over, not by a long shot, and Kirk followed, knowing that whatever just happened at that airport was only the beginning, because once management moves in silence and families find out last, the fallout never stays contained, it only spreads, pulling everyone into the storm whether they're ready or not. Outside the terminal the air felt heavier, like the city itself knew something had gone wrong. Kirk slowed his pace, trying to catch Jasmine before she disappeared into the crowd, his voice low and urgent. "Jasmine, wait, this isn't how this was supposed to go." She spun around, eyes blazing, the hurt finally spilling over into anger she'd been holding back for months. "When is it ever how it's supposed to go with you, Kirk? Every time I trust the plan, somebody else gets to rewrite it. First it's whispers, then it's rules, then it's management stepping in like they're the ones living this." Kirk rubbed his jaw, choosing his words carefully, or at least trying to. "You think I wanted this cancelled? You think I wanted Rashida blindsided? You think I enjoy being stuck in the middle of everybody's feelings?" Jasmine laughed again, bitter this time. "You're not stuck in the middle, Kirk. You built the middle. You live in it. You benefit from it. And when things blow up, everybody else is told to be patient." Inside the car ride back, silence filled the space between them, broken only by Jasmine's phone buzzing nonstop. Messages from friends, from people who had already seen her airport post and were now asking questions she didn't have answers to. "Is it true you're not going? What happened? Did Rashida shut it down?" Jasmine stared out the window, jaw clenched, feeling the familiar frustration of being the headline without being the decision-maker. Kirk watched her from the corner of his eye, knowing this was bigger than one trip, bigger than one argument. Back home, Rashida paced the floor, replaying the phone call over and over in her mind. The shock hadn't worn off, it had hardened into something sharper. She called her sister, her voice shaking despite her best effort to stay composed. "They planned a whole international situation and nobody thought to mention my name until it blew up. Management don't move unless somebody opened that door. Somebody was talking. Somebody made a call. And now I'm supposed to just accept it." Her sister tried to calm her down, reminding her that rumors always twist the truth, but Rashida wasn't buying it. Fans already speculating, already picking sides, already blaming her for something she didn't even know existed. By the time she opened her social media, it was clear the narrative was running without her. Comments flooded in, some sympathetic, others accusing, all loud. Fans are shocked, fans are confused, fans are divided. And in the middle of it all was her marriage, once again under a microscope. Management, meanwhile, was scrambling. What was meant to be a quiet preventative decision had turned into a public mess. Emails flew back and forth, phone calls stacking up, blame shifting behind closed doors. One executive insisted the trip posed a risk, another claimed Kirk himself had raised concerns earlier. Nobody wanted to own the call now that it was out in the open. The phrase "for everyone's protection" got tossed around like a shield, but it wasn't protecting anyone anymore. Kirk finally called Rashida again later that night, his voice softer, almost defeated. "I didn't know they were going to do it like that. I swear to you." She didn't respond right away, letting the silence stretch until it hurt. "You swear a lot, Kirk. You swear and then I find out after the fact. How do you think that makes me look? How do you think that makes me feel?" Kirk admitted he should have looped her in sooner, that he thought he could manage it quietly, that he didn't expect management to pull the plug without warning. Rashida snapped back that managing quietly is exactly the problem, that secrecy is what keeps blowing up in their faces. On the other side of town, Jasmine sat alone, replaying her own version of events, feeling used and disposable all at once. She drafted a post, deleted it, drafted another. Every word felt like it could start a fire or make her look guilty by association. She called a friend, venting through tears she didn't expect to fall. They cancel the flight and suddenly I'm the villain. Like I planned this. Like I forced anybody's hand. I'm tired of being the easy target. Her friend reminded her that visibility comes with a price, that sometimes silence is power. Jasmine wasn't sure she believed that anymore. Silence had never protected her before. All it did was let other people tell her story. She decided to post something vague but pointed. Sometimes plans change for reasons nobody wants to explain. Truth always travels, even when flights don't. Within minutes, the post was everywhere. That single caption reignited everything. Fans dissected it, blogs ran with it, and Rashida saw it almost immediately. Her chest tightened as she read it, interpreting it as a shot, a suggestion that something was being hidden from the public. She called Kirk again, anger back in full force. You see what she posted. Now it looks like I'm the liar. Now it looks like I'm the one blocking things. Kirk tried to explain Jasmine was emotional, that she felt shut out, that she didn't mean it that way. Rashida shot back that intention doesn't matter when perception is already set. The family was left divided, not just between Kirk and Rashida, but among friends who suddenly felt pressured to pick a side. Some defended Rashida, saying she deserved respect and transparency. Others sympathized with Jasmine, arguing that she was constantly left exposed while others stayed protected. Kirk found himself isolated, blamed by both sides, realizing that his attempt to control the narrative had done the opposite. Days passed, but the tension didn't fade. Instead, it evolved. Management suggested a sit-down, a controlled conversation to calm things down. Rashida agreed reluctantly, wanting answers more than apologies. Jasmine hesitated, wary of another meeting where decisions were already made before she walked in. Kirk insisted it was necessary, that things couldn't stay like this. When they finally sat in the same room again, the air was thick with unspoken resentment. No cameras, no audience, just 3 people and a table separating years of complicated history. Management opened with corporate language, explaining risk assessment and brand alignment, but Rashida cut them off. Say it plain. Who decided I didn't need to know? The room went quiet, eyes shifted, nobody answered immediately. Jasmine broke the silence instead. All I know is I didn't cancel anything. I didn't ask for anything except honesty. If this trip was too much, say that. Don't let me pack my bags and look stupid at the airport. Her voice cracked, the vulnerability cutting through the tension. Rashida looked at her for the first time without anger, seeing not an enemy but a person caught in the fallout. Kirk watched that moment closely, realizing how rare it was. Management finally admitted the decision came after internal discussions triggered by concerns raised earlier, concerns about optics, timing, and potential backlash. Rashida turned to Kirk slowly. Concerns raised by who? Kirk didn't answer right away, his silence speaking louder than words. Jasmine's eyes widened, understanding hitting her all at once. So this started with you. You lit the fuse and walked away. Kirk tried to explain himself, saying he only voiced worries, that he didn't expect such a drastic move. Both women responded at once, frustration colliding. Worries become actions when you don't own them, Rashida said. Jasmine added that his half-truths were what kept blowing everything up. Emotions ran high as voices overlapped, years of unresolved tension pouring out in one messy release. By the end of the meeting, nothing was fixed, but everything was exposed. London was no longer the issue. Trust was. Communication was. The realization that management didn't control the chaos as much as they thought, and Kirk didn't either. As they left separately, it was clear this story wasn't dying down. It was transforming, setting the stage for consequences none of them were fully prepared to face, and fans watching from the outside knew one thing for sure, this drama was far from over. The days following that meeting felt longer than usual, like time itself had slowed just to stretch out the tension. Kirk barely slept, his phone lighting up through the night with messages he didn't have the energy to answer. Some were from friends asking what really happened, others from management trying to reframe the situation, and a few from family members who were tired of hearing his name in conversations that never ended well. Everywhere he turned, the same question followed him. Why did London really get cancelled? Rashida threw herself into work, but the distraction only lasted so long. Every studio session ended with someone bringing it up carefully, like stepping around broken glass. She could feel the shift in energy when she walked into rooms, the sympathy mixed with curiosity. People were watching her, waiting for a reaction, waiting for her to slip. Fans are shocked at how quiet she's been, blogs started to say. Silence means something, they claimed. Rashida read the headlines and shook her head, realizing that no matter what she did, the narrative was already running. Jasmine, on the other hand, leaned into the noise. She stopped pretending it wasn't happening, stopped trying to be the bigger person in private while getting blamed in public. She went live one night, not naming names but speaking directly to the camera, her voice steady but emotional. When plans are made without honesty, people get hurt. When decisions are taken out of your hands, you're left holding the blame. I'm tired of protecting people who don't protect me. Fans flooded the comments, some cheering her on, others accusing her of stirring the pot. The divide grew wider. Kirk watched that live from his couch, feeling every word land like a punch. He texted Jasmine immediately, asking her to take it down, saying it was making things worse. She replied just as fast. Worse for who? That message stayed with him. Worse for who? Because the truth was, the chaos wasn't worse for everyone equally. Some people had more to lose, more to protect, more to hide. Management called another emergency meeting, this time without Jasmine. Rashida noticed immediately and called it out. If we're doing this, we're doing it with everybody in the room. Management tried to argue logistics, emotions, timing, but Rashida wouldn't budge. You don't get to decide who's too emotional after you created the mess. Kirk sat there quietly, realizing how far things had shifted. Rashida wasn't asking anymore, she was demanding. When Jasmine was finally invited, she walked in guarded, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room. Nobody smiled, nobody offered small talk. The air felt cold, professional, but underneath it all was resentment simmering just below the surface. Management started with apologies, carefully worded, clearly rehearsed. Mistakes were made. Communication could have been better. Intentions were misunderstood. Jasmine cut them off. Intentions don't cancel flights. Actions do. That line changed the tone instantly. Rashida nodded slowly, agreeing more than she expected to. Kirk felt the room closing in on him. Management tried to redirect, saying the goal now was damage control. What's done is done. The focus should be on moving forward. Jasmine laughed softly. Moving forward without accountability is just pretending nothing happened. The conversation turned to blame, even if nobody said the word out loud. Rashida asked directly whether Kirk had raised concerns that led to the cancellation. Kirk admitted he had voiced worries, framing them as protective, not obstructive. Jasmine responded that protection without consent is control. Rashida added that decisions about her marriage and public image should never be filtered through someone else's fear. Emotions ran high again, but this time there was less yelling and more clarity. Truths that had been danced around were finally said out loud. Kirk admitted he was scared. Scared of headlines, scared of backlash, scared of losing everything he'd built. Jasmine admitted she was tired of being the collateral damage of other people's fear. Rashida admitted that the shock hurt more than the situation itself, that being left out cut deeper than any rumor ever could. Fans watching from the outside felt the shift too. Leaks from the meeting made their way online, fueling new debates. Some fans softened toward Jasmine, others doubled down in defense of Rashida. Kirk's image took the hardest hit. Comments questioned his leadership, his honesty, his ability to handle pressure. The family was left divided not just emotionally, but publicly. At home, Rashida confronted Kirk in a way she hadn't before. No shouting, no accusations, just exhaustion. I need to know if you can be honest with me when things get uncomfortable. Because if you can't, I can't keep defending you. Kirk felt that land heavier than any argument. He promised to do better, but the words sounded thin even to him. Jasmine, meanwhile, started getting offers. Interviews, appearances, people suddenly interested in her side of the story. She turned most of them down, knowing how quickly things could be twisted. But the attention reminded her of something important. She had a voice. She didn't need permission to use it. The realization was empowering and terrifying all at once. Management suggested a public statement, something unified to calm the storm. Rashida agreed only if it was honest. Jasmine agreed only if it didn't make her look like the problem. Kirk hesitated, knowing any statement would lock in a version of events he could no longer control. When the statement finally dropped, it was careful but revealing. Plans changed due to internal concerns. Communication gaps caused confusion. Lessons were learned. Fans weren't satisfied. Questions remained. Who raised the concerns? Why was Rashida left out? Why did Jasmine find out at the airport? The unresolved pieces kept the drama alive. Podcasts dissected it. Comment sections exploded. Everyone had an opinion. One night, Jasmine ran into someone from the industry who pulled her aside and said quietly that London wasn't the only thing that almost got cancelled. That management had been discussing boundaries for a while, looking for a moment to step in. Jasmine realized then that this wasn't just about a flight. It was about control, about drawing lines, about deciding who gets to move freely and who doesn't. Rashida had a similar realization when a close friend told her the cancellation might have been framed as protection, but it was really about avoiding unpredictability. That word stuck with her. Unpredictable. She wondered who was considered unpredictable and why. The thought lingered, unsettling. Kirk found himself alone more often, forced to sit with the consequences of trying to manage everything from the shadows. He saw now that silence and half-truths don't keep things stable, they just delay the explosion. The London flight was cancelled, but the fallout kept traveling, crossing boundaries no one could stop. As weeks passed, the immediate shock faded, but the tension didn't. Relationships shifted permanently. Trust wasn't fully repaired. Jasmine and Rashida weren't friends, but they weren't enemies either. There was a mutual understanding now, born from shared frustration. Kirk stood between them, no longer able to pretend the middle was a safe place to stand. Fans sensed that something fundamental had changed. This wasn't just another scandal to blow over. This was a turning point. And while London never happened, the drama it sparked reshaped everything, setting the stage for choices that would define what came next, whether anyone was ready or not. The tension settled into something quieter but heavier, like a storm that never fully leaves the sky. Rashida noticed it first in the small moments. Kirk pausing before answering questions. Kirk checking his phone and turning it face down. Kirk choosing his words like they were stepping stones over thin ice. She didn't accuse him anymore. That phase had passed. Now she observed, and that observation scared him more than yelling ever did. Jasmine felt the shift too, even from a distance. People who once avoided her suddenly wanted proximity. Industry conversations changed tone. She wasn't just a side note anymore. She was part of the conversation, whether anyone liked it or not. But with that visibility came isolation. She could feel who was genuine and who was only curious. Still, there was a strange sense of relief in no longer shrinking herself to make situations easier for others. Kirk tried to regain control the only way he knew how, by fixing things quietly. He reached out to old allies, tried to soften narratives, tried to frame the London situation as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But every time he thought he'd smoothed something over, a new detail surfaced, a new perspective leaked, reminding him that stories don't stay contained once they're out in the world. Rashida eventually agreed to sit down with Jasmine alone. No management, no Kirk, just the two of them. The decision surprised everyone, especially Kirk, who felt excluded but knew better than to object. When they met, the atmosphere was cautious but respectful. Jasmine spoke first, admitting she never wanted to embarrass Rashida, never wanted to be part of another public breakdown. She said she just wanted honesty. Rashida listened, really listened, and when she responded, her voice wasn't defensive. She admitted the shock had hurt more than anything, that being the last to know made her feel invisible in her own life. That conversation didn't fix everything, but it shifted something fundamental. There was no alliance formed, no dramatic reconciliation, but there was clarity. Both women saw that the real damage came from decisions made without transparency. They left that meeting with boundaries, not promises. When Kirk found out about the meeting afterward, it rattled him. Not because he was angry, but because he realized things were moving without him now. The middle ground he'd relied on was gone. People were choosing directness over mediation, truth over comfort. It forced him to confront a hard truth. His influence wasn't what it used to be. Management, sensing the shift, attempted to reassert control. New guidelines were proposed, clearer approval processes, more oversight. The language was polished, but the message was clear. No more surprises. Rashida pushed back, insisting that oversight shouldn't come at the cost of respect. Jasmine echoed that sentiment, saying boundaries should protect people, not silence them. Fans continued to debate, but the tone changed. Less outrage, more analysis. People started connecting dots, realizing this wasn't an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern. Podcasts discussed power dynamics. Blogs questioned who really benefits when decisions are centralized. The London flight became a symbol, shorthand for a much bigger issue. Kirk watched all of this unfold, realizing that for the first time, he couldn't spin his way out. The only path forward was accountability, and that terrified him. He finally sat down with Rashida and admitted something he'd avoided saying out loud. "I thought I was protecting us. But I was really protecting myself. Rashida didn't respond immediately. When she did, she told him that acknowledgement mattered, but it wasn't a reset button. Trust takes time, and time doesn't move on apologies alone. Jasmine, meanwhile, declined another interview offer and instead focused on her own projects. The experience hardened her resolve. She stopped waiting for invitations and started creating her own opportunities. People noticed. Respect followed. Not universal, but enough to matter. Weeks later, a rumor surfaced that another international opportunity was being discussed, this time with clear communication and full transparency. Fans speculated wildly, wondering if history would repeat itself. But behind the scenes, the approach was different. Meetings included everyone from the start. Concerns were voiced openly. No one waited until the last minute to pull the plug. Kirk stayed quieter than usual, choosing to listen more than speak. Rashida remained cautious but engaged. Jasmine participated without shrinking, without overextending. It was awkward. It was uncomfortable. But it was honest. The London flight never took off, but its shadow lingered, reshaping how decisions were made and who got a voice in them. Relationships were altered permanently. Some bridges burned. Others rebuilt differently. Fans watched closely, knowing they'd witnessed a turning point, not just another scandal. And while questions still lingered, one thing became clear. Secrets move fast, but truth travels farther. And once it does, there's no canceling the impact, no matter how many flights get grounded along the way. Time passed, but the London situation refused to fade into the background. It became a reference point, something people brought up whenever a new move was announced or a new decision was rumored. Rashida noticed it in conversations that suddenly stopped when she entered the room, in questions disguised as concern. She stayed composed, but inside, the weight of it all pressed on her harder than she admitted. This wasn't just about public perception anymore. It was about whether her voice truly mattered when it counted. Kirk felt like he was walking on glass. Every move he made was scrutinized, every silence interpreted. He tried to overcorrect at first, explaining too much, sharing details that only made things murkier. Rashida finally told him to stop. You don't fix trust by talking nonstop. You fix it by being consistent. That sentence stayed with him longer than any argument they'd ever had. Jasmine watched from her own lane, choosing distance over drama, but the drama kept finding her anyway. Fans tagged her in posts daily, asking if she felt vindicated, asking if she regretted anything. Sometimes she wanted to scream that there was nothing to celebrate. Being right didn't feel good when the cost was public chaos. But she also refused to apologize for speaking up. That chapter of her life was closed. Management released another internal memo emphasizing transparency and inclusion, but the damage had already been done. People read between the lines now. Every announcement was analyzed for what it didn't say. The trust gap wasn't just between individuals anymore, it was systemic. Whispers spread that others had been quietly sidelined before, that the London flight was just the first time it exploded publicly. A family gathering brought everything into sharp focus. Smiles were polite, laughter forced. Someone joked about travel plans, and the room went quiet. Rashida excused herself, needing air. Kirk followed, unsure whether to comfort or stay silent. She told him plainly that this couldn't keep happening, that she wouldn't keep absorbing shock after shock for the sake of appearances. Kirk nodded, knowing she was right, knowing promises alone wouldn't be enough. Jasmine declined an invitation to that same gathering, choosing peace over proximity. She spent the evening with friends who knew her before the noise, before headlines dictated how people saw her. They reminded her that she was more than a moment, more than a controversy. It grounded her in a way nothing else had. Weeks later, an opportunity arose that mirrored London in scale but not in execution. This time, every conversation was upfront. Concerns were raised openly. Nothing moved forward without full agreement. It was slower, messier, but honest. Rashida appreciated the change but stayed cautious. Trust, once fractured, rebuilds in fragments. Kirk struggled with letting go of control. Listening without steering felt unnatural, almost painful. But he forced himself to sit back, to hear without defending. He realized that being involved didn't mean being in charge. It was a lesson learned late, but learned nonetheless. Jasmine participated selectively, asserting boundaries without apology. She spoke when it mattered and stayed silent when it didn't. The difference was intentionality. No more reacting out of frustration, no more explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. Fans noticed the shift. The tone of conversations changed again, this time softer, more reflective. Some admitted they'd rushed to judgment. Others doubled down, unwilling to let go of the drama. But the chaos lost its edge. It was no longer feeding on surprise. It was settling into understanding. The London flight remained cancelled, permanently frozen in time, but its impact continued to ripple outward. Relationships evolved, power dynamics shifted. People who once relied on silence learned the cost of it. People who once felt unheard found their footing. There was no grand resolution, no viral reconciliation moment. Just a gradual recalibration. Rashida reclaimed her sense of agency. Jasmine reclaimed her narrative. Kirk faced the consequences of choices he once believed were harmless. And in the end, London became less about a destination and more about a lesson. That decisions made in shadows rarely stay there. That managing perceptions can never replace managing relationships. And that when voices are ignored, they eventually get louder, not quieter. As the story settled into history, fans still debated what could have been, but those closest to it understood something deeper. The flight didn't need to take off to change everything. It already had. Even after everything seemed to settle on the surface, there was an undercurrent that never fully disappeared. It showed up in interviews where answers were a little too careful, in group settings where laughter came a second too late. Rashida became more intentional about how she moved, who she looped in, and when. She no longer assumed inclusion. She required it. That shift didn't go unnoticed, and while some respected it, others quietly resented it. Kirk felt that resentment more than anyone. Doors that once opened easily now required effort. Conversations that used to be casual felt tense. He realized that reputation isn't lost in one moment, but repaired slowly, if at all. There were nights he replayed the London cancellation in his head, wondering which choice could have changed the outcome. Speaking up sooner, being honest sooner, or maybe not trying to manage everything alone. Regret has a way of being specific. Jasmine continued building momentum in her own lane. She stopped referencing the situation publicly, but people kept bringing it up for her. Sometimes she addressed it calmly, other times she redirected entirely. The power was in choosing. She no longer felt the need to prove anything. Being heard once was enough to know she could be heard again. Behind the scenes, whispers grew louder that London wasn't the only cancelled move. Other plans had been paused, reshaped, or quietly shelved. People started comparing notes, realizing patterns they'd ignored before. Management felt the pressure. Transparency wasn't just a buzzword anymore. It was a demand. Rashida confronted that reality during a private conversation with a longtime collaborator who admitted they'd hesitated to loop her in on a decision, fearing backlash. She corrected them immediately. Don't decide for me what I can handle. That mindset, she realized, was the same one that led to London. Protection disguised as exclusion. Kirk overheard parts of that exchange and felt the weight of it settle in his chest. It wasn't just about one flight. It was about a habit. A reflex to control outcomes instead of trusting people with the truth. Breaking that habit felt like relearning how to breathe. Jasmine experienced her own reckoning when someone close to her suggested she'd benefited from the chaos. The comment stung. She pushed back, explaining that visibility earned through conflict comes with a cost that's rarely worth it. Being seen isn't the same as being supported. The distinction mattered more now. As months passed, the situation became less sensational but more instructive. People referenced it in meetings, in planning sessions, as an example of what not to do. Don't pull a London. The phrase carried weight. It meant don't move in silence. Don't assume consent. Don't wait until the last minute to be honest. Fans noticed the industry learning in real time. Some appreciated the growth, others missed the raw chaos. But the shift was undeniable. The family was left divided in some ways, but clearer in others. Lines were drawn, not to separate, but to define. Rashida and Jasmine crossed paths occasionally, exchanging brief but respectful greetings. No tension, no warmth, just understanding. They didn't need to be allies to acknowledge what they'd both endured. Kirk observed those moments quietly, recognizing that the two women had found a balance he was still working toward. One afternoon, Kirk was asked directly in an interview whether he regretted how London was handled. He paused longer than usual before answering. Yes, he said, not because the flight didn't happen, but because of how people found out. That honesty surprised people. It didn't erase the past, but it softened the edges. Jasmine saw the clip and nodded to herself. Accountability didn't fix everything, but it mattered. Rashida felt the same. Progress wasn't loud, it was consistent. By the time a year had nearly passed, London was no longer trending, but its imprint remained. Decisions were slower, conversations longer, but fewer people were blindsided. That was the real change. Not perfection, but awareness. And for those who lived through it, the lesson stayed sharp. Silence isn't neutral. Timing matters. And control, when mistaken for care, can cost more than it saves. The flight never left the ground, but the impact traveled far beyond any destination. Even with time creating distance, the story refused to fully let go of the people involved. It lingered in subtle ways, in how decisions were announced with extra care, in how group chats suddenly included more people than before. Rashida noticed that people now asked instead of assuming. It wasn't perfect, but it was different, and different felt like progress. She no longer waited for validation. She moved with certainty, knowing that being informed was not a privilege but a right. Kirk continued his slow process of recalibration. There were moments when old instincts kicked in, moments when he wanted to smooth things over quietly, to manage perceptions before managing feelings. But he caught himself more often now. Growth didn't feel heroic, it felt uncomfortable and humbling. He learned that leadership without transparency is just control wearing a friendly face. Jasmine's world expanded in unexpected ways. People sought her opinion not just for drama but for insight. She had been through something that exposed how systems fail when honesty is optional. She didn't brand herself as a victim or a whistleblower. She simply spoke from experience, and that authenticity resonated. The attention she received was steadier now, less chaotic, rooted in respect rather than curiosity. Management, under constant scrutiny, made structural changes that went beyond memos. New protocols were introduced. Nothing moved without full disclosure. Last-minute decisions required consensus. It slowed everything down, but fewer fires needed putting out. The London situation was quietly referenced in training sessions, stripped of names but heavy with meaning. Fans still debated, but the outrage cycle had cooled. People began revisiting old clips, old statements, seeing them through a new lens. Some admitted they'd misunderstood Jasmine. Others realized Rashida had been placed in impossible positions repeatedly. Kirk's role was dissected endlessly, his intentions weighed against his actions. Accountability became the common thread. Rashida had a moment of clarity during a conversation with a younger artist who asked her how she handled being left out of decisions that affected her. She answered honestly, "I stopped accepting it." The simplicity of that truth surprised even her. Resilience wasn't about enduring anymore. It was about asserting. Kirk faced his own mirror when someone he mentored repeated one of his old patterns, trying to fix a situation quietly and causing unintended fallout. Kirk intervened immediately, sharing the London story not as gossip but as a cautionary tale. Don't wait until the damage is done to tell the truth. That advice felt earned. Jasmine, reflecting privately, acknowledged the toll the experience took on her trust. She guarded her peace fiercely now, but she didn't close herself off. She learned to distinguish between access and intimacy, between opportunity and exploitation. The difference mattered. The London flight became less of a headline and more of a reference point, shorthand for a turning point. People didn't laugh about it anymore. They respected it. It represented a moment when silence failed and consequences followed. There were still awkward encounters, still moments when old feelings resurfaced. Healing wasn't linear, but there was forward motion. Rashida and Kirk found a new rhythm, one built on clearer communication, even when it was uncomfortable. Jasmine found stability in self-definition, no longer waiting for others to name her role. Fans, watching from the outside, sensed the evolution. The drama had matured. It wasn't louder. It was deeper. Questions replaced accusations. Context replaced assumptions. Emotions ran high less often, but when they did, they were handled differently. In quiet moments, each of them understood the same truth. London didn't need to happen to matter. The cancellation forced conversations that had been avoided for years. It exposed fractures and demanded repair. It shifted power dynamics and redefined boundaries. And while no one would ever call it a blessing, they recognized its impact. Sometimes disruption is the only thing strong enough to break cycles. Sometimes a grounded flight changes more than a successful landing ever could. The story didn't end cleanly. Real stories rarely do, but it ended honestly. And that, more than anything, was the lesson that stayed. As the months stretched on, the echoes of London showed up in ways no one expected. It wasn't in headlines anymore, but in habits. Rashida noticed that before any major decision, people now paused and asked who needed to be in the room. That pause used to be absent. Now it was instinct. She felt a quiet sense of validation in that, not triumph but recognition. Her voice carried weight because she insisted it should. Kirk struggled with that shift more than he admitted. There were moments when he felt replaced, not in position, but in influence. People didn't come to him first anymore. They went straight to the source. At first it bruised his ego. Later, it humbled him. He began to understand that being central isn't the same as being essential. Trust doesn't orbit around one person. It's shared or it collapses. Jasmine experienced something different. Distance brought clarity. She no longer replayed the airport scene in her head with the same intensity. It still stung, but it no longer defined her. When people asked about London now, she answered calmly, without heat. It wasn't avoidance. It was closure. She had said what she needed to say when it mattered most. Behind closed doors, management continued repairing its image, but the internal culture had changed. Silence was no longer rewarded. Transparency became currency. Those who once thrived on being gatekeepers found themselves uncomfortable in the new environment. Information moved faster, wider, and with fewer filters. Mistakes were caught earlier. Fewer people were blindsided. Rashida had a moment that confirmed everything had shifted when she was looped into a conversation at its earliest stage, not as an afterthought, not as a courtesy, but as a necessity. She didn't smile or celebrate. She simply participated. That was the win. Not acknowledgement after the fact, but inclusion from the start. Kirk watched that moment quietly, feeling both proud and exposed. He realized that for years he'd mistaken anticipation for leadership. Making decisions before others could react felt efficient. Now he saw the cost. Efficiency without empathy creates fallout. London was proof of that. Jasmine, meanwhile, began mentoring someone younger who found themselves on the edge of a similar dynamic. She didn't tell them what to do. She told them what to watch for. When plans move fast but explanations don't. When decisions are framed as protection but feel like restriction. She spoke from experience, not bitterness. Fans slowly moved on, but not without taking something with them. Discussions online grew more nuanced. People questioned power structures more openly. The narrative matured. It wasn't just about who was right or wrong anymore. It was about why situations like this keep happening and who benefits when they do. There were still critics. There always are. Some claimed the drama had been exaggerated, others insisted it had been minimized. Truth lived somewhere in between. But those closest to it knew the impact was real because it reshaped behavior, not just opinions. Rashida and Kirk had hard conversations that never would have happened before. Not explosive, not dramatic, just honest. About fear, about control, about what partnership actually requires. Some nights ended without resolution, but even that felt different. Unresolved honesty was better than polished silence. Jasmine found peace in no longer needing proximity to validate her experience. She trusted her instincts now. When something felt off, she addressed it or walked away. She didn't wait for confirmation. London taught her that waiting can cost you your footing. The phrase, "it won't be another London," started showing up casually, half joking but loaded with meaning. It reminded everyone that shortcuts have consequences. That clarity matters more than comfort. That canceling a flight is easy. Canceling fallout is not. As time went on, new stories took center stage, as they always do. But for those who lived through it, London remained a quiet checkpoint. A before and after. Before decisions were made quietly and justified later. After honesty became part of the process, not an apology. No one involved would claim it made them better overnight. Growth was uneven. Mistakes still happened. But the direction changed. And direction matters. In the end, London wasn't about where they were going. It was about how they were moving. Who they carried with them. And who they were willing to leave behind. Once that was understood, there was no going back to the old way. The flight stayed cancelled. The lesson stayed airborne. Even as new projects took shape and fresh headlines competed for attention, the London situation lived on as a quiet reference point in private conversations. It was no longer spoken with heat but with caution. Rashida noticed that people were more careful about assumptions, more willing to ask questions instead of filling in gaps themselves. It wasn't dramatic, but it was meaningful. Respect often arrives quietly, after the noise dies down. Kirk continued navigating the consequences of his earlier choices. Some days felt like progress, others like setbacks. There were moments when he felt misunderstood, moments when he wanted to defend his intentions all over again. But he resisted. Explaining himself endlessly had never fixed anything. Listening had. He learned that accountability isn't about winning people back. It's about showing up differently, consistently, even when nobody's applauding. Jasmine experienced a different kind of growth. With the drama no longer dominating her every interaction, she discovered space to reflect. She realized how much energy she'd spent trying to make sense of other people's decisions instead of trusting her own instincts. London had been a breaking point, but also a starting line. She stopped negotiating her boundaries. She stated them. Management, still cautious, became more deliberate. Meetings were longer. Agendas clearer. Questions encouraged. The culture shifted from reactive to preventative. London had taught them that controlling outcomes without controlling communication was a losing game. People don't react to decisions as much as they react to how those decisions are made. Rashida felt a sense of grounding she hadn't felt in a long time. Not because everything was perfect, but because she no longer felt blindsided. Surprises still happened, but they weren't strategic. They were organic. She trusted her own responses more now, no longer questioning whether she was allowed to feel a certain way. Kirk had a moment of realization during a casual conversation with someone new to the circle. They referenced London lightly, almost jokingly, and then added that it changed how they approached collaboration. That stopped him in his tracks. The impact had reached beyond the immediate fallout. It had altered behavior. That was bigger than any headline. Jasmine noticed something similar when someone thanked her for speaking up back then, saying it made them feel less alone in their own situation. She hadn't anticipated that ripple effect. It reminded her that telling the truth, even imperfectly, can give others permission to do the same. Fans continued to speculate occasionally, but the urgency was gone. The drama had matured into context. People understood there were layers, motivations, fears. It wasn't black and white. That understanding didn't erase opinions, but it softened them. Rashida and Kirk found themselves in a more honest partnership, even when it was uncomfortable. There were no grand declarations, just steady effort. Trust wasn't restored in one moment. It was rebuilt in small decisions, in transparency, in showing up when it mattered. Jasmine remained independent, intentional. She didn't chase closure from anyone else. She carried her own. When London came up now, it felt like a chapter, not an open wound. The industry moved on, but it moved differently. People remembered. People adjusted. London became a quiet benchmark, a reminder of what happens when communication breaks down and power goes unchecked. And while no one involved would ever say they were grateful for the chaos, they acknowledged the change it forced. Sometimes disruption doesn't arrive to destroy, but to expose. Sometimes a cancelled flight reveals more than a successful journey ever could. The story didn't end with applause or outrage. It ended with awareness. And that awareness stayed. The longer time went on, the clearer it became that London had shifted something permanent. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deep enough that it couldn't be undone. Rashida felt it in the way conversations started earlier now, before decisions were locked in. People checked in instead of checking boxes. It didn't erase the past, but it changed the future in ways that felt earned rather than forced. Kirk noticed that his role had transformed. He was no longer the silent bridge between worlds, quietly filtering information and smoothing edges. Now he was expected to speak plainly, even when it made him uncomfortable. There were moments he missed the old way, the illusion of control, but he couldn't deny the relief that came with not carrying everything alone. Honesty, even when messy, weighed less than secrecy ever did. Jasmine experienced something close to peace. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of confusion. She no longer questioned whether she imagined the disrespect or exaggerated the dismissal. London had confirmed what her instincts already knew. Once she accepted that, the doubt fell away. She moved with clarity, choosing where to invest her energy and where to step back without explanation. Management continued adapting, though not without resistance. Some people struggled with the loss of quiet authority, the inability to make sweeping decisions without scrutiny. Others thrived in the new openness, finding that collaboration reduced conflict in the long run. London became a lesson shared without names, a cautionary tale that reminded everyone what happens when communication is treated as optional. Rashida had a conversation one evening that stayed with her. Someone told her they admired how she handled being blindsided, how she didn't explode publicly or retreat completely. She corrected them gently. "I didn't handle it perfectly. I handled it honestly." That distinction mattered. Perfection would have required silence. Honesty required discomfort. Kirk overheard that exchange and felt both pride and regret. Pride in her strength. Regret that it had been tested unnecessarily. He realized that part of rebuilding trust was accepting that some damage couldn't be undone, only acknowledged. Growth didn't erase history. It responded to it. Jasmine found herself less reactive when new situations arose. Where she once braced for disappointment, she now asked direct questions early. When answers felt vague, she pressed. When explanations didn't align with actions, she stepped back. London had taught her that clarity is not rude. It is protective. Fans still revisited the story from time to time, especially when similar situations surfaced elsewhere. Comments referenced it as a moment when things crossed a line, when behind-the-scenes decisions spilled into public consequence. Some fans softened their stance, admitting they'd underestimated the impact. Others remained fixed in their opinions. But the conversation itself evolved. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was analysis. Rashida and Kirk continued navigating their relationship with more transparency than before. It wasn't always smooth. There were moments of frustration, moments when old habits resurfaced. But there was also accountability. When something felt off, it was addressed, not buried. That alone changed the dynamic. Jasmine kept her distance but not her resentment. She didn't need proximity to feel validated. She had learned that being included starts with including yourself. When opportunities arose that mirrored old patterns, she recognized them quickly and opted out without drama. Her peace mattered more than proving a point. The phrase "fans are shocked" eventually stopped appearing in headlines about them. Shock gave way to understanding. Emotions ran high less often because expectations were clearer. The family was left divided in some ways, but united in one important lesson. Silence creates space for chaos. As time passed, London became less of a wound and more of a scar. Visible, remembered, but no longer painful to the touch. It marked a moment when things went wrong and couldn't be ignored. Scars don't fade because they're meaningless. They fade because healing happens around them. Kirk reflected on that often. He stopped framing London as something that happened to him and started seeing it as something that happened because of him. That shift was uncomfortable, but necessary. Responsibility didn't weaken him, it grounded him. Jasmine, looking back, no longer wished the flight had happened. She realized that had it taken off, the underlying issues would have remained hidden. The cancellation forced truth into the open. It cost her emotionally, but it also freed her from uncertainty. Rashida reached a point where she could talk about London without feeling blindsided all over again. She could acknowledge the hurt without reliving it. That was healing. Not forgetting, not excusing, but understanding where the line was drawn and why it mattered. The story never wrapped up neatly. There was no single apology that fixed everything, no dramatic reunion that erased the tension. Instead, there was adjustment, growth, awareness. People learned how to move differently. And in quiet moments, each of them understood the same thing. The flight was cancelled, but the truth landed exactly where it needed to. Even as the story drifted further into the past, its influence kept showing up in quiet, almost invisible ways. Rashida noticed how people checked her comfort level before looping her into plans, how assumptions were replaced with questions. It didn't feel like walking on eggshells. It felt like consideration. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to brace herself for surprises disguised as protection. Kirk continued wrestling with the version of himself that London exposed. There were moments when he caught the urge to handle things quietly, to soften edges before anyone noticed them. Each time, he stopped himself. The habit was hard to break. Secrecy had once felt efficient, even caring. Now he understood it as avoidance. Avoidance of conflict, avoidance of accountability, avoidance of uncomfortable conversations that needed to happen early instead of too late. Jasmine watched these shifts from a distance, not out of bitterness, but intention. She had learned that proximity often blurred lines she needed to keep clear. She didn't need to be in the room to know when something was off anymore. She trusted herself. When people asked if she felt excluded, she answered honestly, "I feel informed now, and that's enough." The difference between the two mattered more than anyone realized. Management, still under the shadow of London, leaned into structure. Meetings were documented. Decisions were summarized and shared. No one wanted to be responsible for another moment where someone found out last. The fear of backlash had transformed into respect for process. It wasn't perfect, but it was deliberate. Rashida had a moment of reflection during a late-night conversation with a close friend. She admitted that the hardest part wasn't the public speculation or the headlines. It was the realization that people she trusted thought they knew what was best for her without asking. That realization had shaken her more than any rumor ever could. But it also clarified something important. Her boundaries weren't suggestions, they were requirements. Kirk heard that sentiment echoed elsewhere, when someone he worked with challenged him openly instead of privately. The exchange was uncomfortable, but productive. Afterward, he realized that openness had replaced fear. People weren't worried about consequences for speaking up. That shift, however painful, was necessary. Jasmine experienced her own evolution. She became more selective with her vulnerability. She no longer explained herself to everyone who asked. She shared with those who listened. London had taught her that not every audience deserves access. Some only want reaction, not truth. Fans still revisited the situation occasionally, especially when similar conflicts surfaced elsewhere. Comparisons were drawn, lessons were debated, the narrative matured. It wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about systems, power, and communication. Fans are shocked became less common than fans are thinking. And that shift mattered. Rashida and Kirk found a steadier rhythm, not because everything was resolved, but because nothing was hidden. Disagreements happened earlier now. Conversations were harder, but shorter. There was less fallout because there was less buildup. Trust wasn't rebuilt through grand gestures. It was rebuilt through predictability. Jasmine crossed paths with Rashida unexpectedly one afternoon. The interaction was brief, polite, uncharged. Afterward, Jasmine realized she didn't feel tension or triumph. She felt closure, not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was unresolved between them. Clarity had replaced confusion. Kirk, reflecting privately, acknowledged that London forced him to confront a truth he'd avoided. Being the connector meant responsibility, not control. When he confused the two, people got hurt. That understanding didn't come easily, but it stayed. As time moved forward, London became less about what went wrong and more about what changed afterward. People referenced it as a turning point, not a failure. A moment when silence stopped being acceptable. A moment when assumptions were challenged. There were still moments of discomfort. Growth isn't smooth, but the direction was clear. Decisions were shared, voices were heard, surprises were minimized, and in the quiet, each of them carried the lesson differently. Rashida carried it as confidence. Jasmine carried it as clarity. Kirk carried it as accountability. The flight never took off. But the truth did, and once it was airborne, there was no grounding it again. Even after all that time, there were still moments when the memory of that airport crept back in, uninvited and sharp. Kirk would catch a glimpse of a departure board on TV or hear someone casually mention London, and for a split second his chest would tighten. Not from guilt alone, but from recognition. That moment had changed how people saw him, and more importantly, how he saw himself. The illusion that he could quietly manage every outcome was gone for good. Rashida felt stronger in ways that surprised her. Not hardened, not closed off, but grounded. She no longer second-guessed her instincts. When something felt off, she said it. When she needed clarity, she asked for it directly. The shock of being left out had transformed into a firm refusal to ever let that happen again. She didn't demand respect loudly. She moved in a way that required it. Jasmine had reached a place where the situation no longer defined her narrative. People still tried to pull her back into it, asking leading questions, hoping for fresh reactions. She declined gently but firmly. That chapter taught me what I needed to learn, she would say. I don't need to relive it. The calm in her voice unsettled some people more than anger ever could. It signaled closure. Behind the scenes, the ripple effects continued. Others began speaking up about moments they'd felt sidelined or unheard in the past. Not publicly, not dramatically, but in rooms where decisions were made. London had given them language. It had shown them that silence only protects those already in power. That realization changed the dynamic in subtle but lasting ways. Management, once reactive, became cautious to the point of overcorrection at times. But even that was preferable to the old way. People knew where they stood. Surprises were rare. And when plans changed, explanations came first, not after the fallout. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Rashida noticed how differently people approached her now. Not with fear, but with consideration. They checked in. They asked questions. They didn't assume she'd just adapt. That shift mattered more than any apology. It showed that the lesson had landed. Kirk had to earn his place in this new dynamic. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he chose honesty over strategy. It didn't always make him comfortable, but it made him credible. Credibility, he learned, was worth more than control. Jasmine found satisfaction in watching the culture shift without needing to be at the center of it. She didn't need credit. She knew her role in the turning point, and that was enough. Peace, she realized, comes from knowing when to step back and let change happen without you. Fans continued to talk, but the tone was different. Less outrage, more reflection. People acknowledged that the situation had layers, that no one walked away untouched. The family was left divided in some ways, but also more honest than before. That honesty, while uncomfortable, was healthier than the polished silence that preceded it. There were moments when old wounds threatened to reopen. A poorly worded comment, a delayed response, a misunderstanding, but they were addressed quickly now. Not buried, not ignored, addressed. That alone prevented new explosions. Rashida and Kirk still had work to do, but the foundation felt real. Not performative, not for appearances, just real. Trust wasn't something they talked about anymore. It was something they practiced. Jasmine continued moving forward, building a life and identity that didn't rely on proximity to chaos. She carried the lesson with her, but she didn't carry the weight anymore. That freedom was earned. And London, the place they never reached, remained a symbol. Not of failure, but of exposure. It forced truths into the open. It disrupted patterns that needed breaking. It reminded everyone involved that decisions made without transparency eventually demand accountability. No one would say they wanted it to happen that way. But no one could deny what came out of it. Clarity replaced confusion. Honesty replaced silence. And while the flight was cancelled, the direction changed forever. Now that you've heard how this London flight turned into one of the most explosive behind-the-scenes moments yet, the real question is what happens next. Because let's be real, this story didn't end with a cancelled plane ticket. It cracked open trust issues, exposed power moves, and left relationships hanging in a way fans are still trying to understand. Emotions ran high, lines were crossed, and even now there are pieces of this drama that don't fully add up. So here's where you come in. Do you think management stepped in to protect everyone, or was this really about control and fear of the truth going too far? Was Kirk trying to hold things together, or did his silence make everything worse? And what about Jasmine and Rashida? Do you see this as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion, or a turning point that changed everything behind the scenes? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is far from over and your voice matters just as much as anyone else's. If this story shocked you, if it made you rethink what really goes on when the cameras aren't rolling, make sure you hit that like button so more people can hear it. And if you don't want to miss the next twist, the next revelation, or the next story that everyone will be talking about, subscribe now and turn on notifications. You never know which secret is about to surface next, and trust me, this world never stays quiet for long. Stay tuned, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.